Today we're going to talk about medieval paint. We will use Cellini as a reference because he wrote a book about medieval painting and the life of a young painter in 1390s. Paint, as always, consists of two things. It is the pigments, and then we will have the medium that binds the pigment to whatever you are painting. We will start to talk about the pigments and what was common pigments during that age. Come closer. We'll start to talk about the red pigment. This is cinnabar. It's a stone that you crush. It is a very old pigment. It's used in Egypt, and they also talk about it in the Bible. As early as 13th century they started to make cinnabar in a artificial way, and when it's done that, it's called vermilion. Vermilion is something that you recognize because this color is called vermilion in many languages. Another red pigment, very common up in Scandinavia, very popular here. This is the iron red. It comes from iron mining, basically. Now, let's talk about the blue pigments. The most famous and the most expensive one is, of course, lapis lazuli. The lapis lazuli is a mineral that could only be mined in Afghanistan in medieval times. This made it very expensive because it had to travel far. It's from beyond the sea, the Outremer, and that means it's the ultramarine. Another one that is not that expensive is the azurite. Azurite is another mineral, but it can be mined in Europe, so it's not that expensive. The last one is the indigo. Indigo is crushed up and made into a very, very dark pigment. As you see, this is very dark blue, almost black. If you mix white into this, it becomes a kind of gray and blue. Now we'll talk about the whites. This is lead white. Lead white becomes a very, very white, and this is, if you have something in lead at home, you can see that it forms a kind of white mold on it, and that's what you use. Another white is the chalk white. This one looks white, but it becomes more of a bone white when you paint with it. This is, and of course we have black. Black is just charcoal that you grind up. This is the yellow pigment, and this is just yellow earth. It's quite common to use even today. And for green we have green earth, also very common today. But we also have this. This is verdigris. This is what forms on copper, and you can scrape this off, and you can use this also. It gives a very turquoise kind of green, but it's hard to work with. We will talk more about verdigris later on. So now we talked about pigments, now we'll talk about the mediums. You can use different kinds of things for mediums, and we have, for example, linseed oil. It is very common when you paint shields in Scandinavia, for example. But what we will talk more about is egg. We will make egg tempera. Now, there is egg tempera and there's an egg and oil tempera. Egg and oil tempera is when you mix in a bit of oil, and this was used in 15th century, but mostly when you were doing artful stuff like paintings and stuff. We will talk about the eggs. Zanini says there's difference between eggs and eggs. He makes a difference between city chicken and farm chicken, and farm chicken is the best. You want the eggs as fresh as possible, and also you will not use all of it. We will use the yolk. You can use the white also, but we will use the yolk as that is the most common way, and that's what Zanini recommends. We'll start with breaking the egg and separating the yolk and the whites. Now, we only want the inside of the yolk, so we'll break it and press out that. Because we do not want the yolk sac. We throw that away. Yep. So this is now the egg and the yolk that we're gonna need. But wait, get back to me! So the yolk that we will use. Now, let's mix up some vermilion. Take some of the pigment. We grind it a bit so we have a very fine ground here. Then we add the egg. How much egg you want and how much pigment, that is something you learn after a while. And keep grinding it up. So you can see this paint is now quite thick. To get a better viscosity, you can just mix in water. We'll talk more about brushes later on. And this is now a working paint. If you need more pigment, you can just mix in more of it. So, if you want to mix different paints to get another color, you can do that, but it's best to mix the paint first. You can mix pigments directly into if you like to also. When they mixed colors in medieval times, they usually used clamshells for this, and that works pretty nice. Now, when mixing verdigris, as I promised I would come back to that, this is a very hard pigment to use because it doesn't dissolve as it should. Now, Zanini told us that it is hard to use and that you can use some vinegar. If you put some vinegar in it, it will dissolve in the vinegar quite nicely. And when you have done this and get a smooth paint like this, then you mix in the egg. This will give you a much better verdigris color to work with. No, of course, verdigris is very poisonous, so you shouldn't use that. Now, this is all we had about mixing the paints, and in the next video we'll start looking at a bit on the brushes and how you make those. Thank you!